Want to advertise your business in a cost-effective way? It's time to give podcast advertising a try. Research shows a high rate of podcast listeners made a purchase as a result of an ad they heard on a podcast. Visit podbean.com/brands to launch a cost-effective podcast advertising campaign in minutes. That's podbean.com/brands.
Hey there, welcome to Science Fliction. My name is Salim Sadarwala, and I am joined by my friend and co-host, Carl Ames. Carl, how are you, man?
I'm good, and good evening to you. How have you been?
Good. We haven't talked in a couple of weeks. I mean, we texted a little bit just to say hi. But how was your holidays? We've been apart for a little bit, so how are your holidays? You do good with everything? The snow is finally here.
Yeah. I didn't work yesterday because of that, but holidays in general were pretty good. I made sure I ate way too much than I was supposed to make up for Thanksgiving, and it still got some. We actually deep fried a turkey.
Oh, nice!
It turned out pretty good.
Nice. Yeah, I went to my sister's. We had a small thing. We normally deep fried turkeys every Christmas and like Thanksgiving when we get together. My brother-in-law usually deep fries the turkey, but this year he smoked the turkey.
Okay.
It was pretty good still. It was not as good as the deep fry in my opinion, but it turned out okay. I mean, it wasn't too bad, and the food was good overall. Fun times with family. That's about it. I mean, can't complain. Did you get anything for Christmas? Like any cool toys or any cool gifts? Is that all?
Toys. I'm turning 36 tomorrow. I don't have any toys or anything. No, I didn't get any. I didn't get any, but what did I get? I got a couple shirts and a bunch of beard stuff.
Nice.
Because I own no beard, like male stuff at all.
Right.
I just cut it off basically. So I got a bunch of balm and oils and lotions and stuff like that. So I'll be trying that out soon. How about you?
Right. I don't normally get stuff for Christmas. My sister got me something, but apparently it didn't arrive in time. So she hasn't told me what it is yet. So I'll find out. I did buy myself more Spider-Man comic books. So
okay.
I'm slowly getting, like we keep talking about the essentials of Spider-Man. I'm slowly getting them all. So I bought 2 more of those. I'm going to have to go hunting at some comic book stores. I was able to find the other 2 online for relatively not expensive prices. I guess maybe those are hard to come by because there's a couple of volumes that were like $70, $80. That's still a bit crazy. I don't know if I need to pay that much because normally I've been able to find them for like $15-$20 depending on what website it ends up being.
They must be out of print or something.
Maybe someone's trying to price gouge in Spider-Man's name. How dare they?
He's hot right now.
He is. He's always hot. He's the 3rd most popular super hero in the world. So, number 1 for me. But some people like Superman more than him. I don't know why, but anyways, we'll get on with our show here. We have a fun one. We're just gonna focus on Spider-Man: No Way Home, because it's such a great movie, in my opinion, that we need to talk about it for the entire episode. And we do have our first guest. I'm excited. Our very first guest. Let's bring our guest in.
Hi.
Ashley. See, I already gonna screw up your last name. Can you help me again, really quick? I apologize.
Yeah. So I'm Ashley Wihanko.
Wihanko, that's it. I'm sorry. I was gonna say pronounce the J again. I knew I was gonna screw it up, and I even told you, it's like I'm gonna try to remember it. But yeah, no, I'm so happy that you were able to join us. You obviously write for Fangirlish, big MCU fan. You love reading comic books like me. I always see you tweeting about your comic books that you bought, and then I get excited too, and I like to respond to your comic books tweets. So yeah, thank you so much again for joining us. How was your holidays?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Also had no clue I was like the first guest, so that's very humbling, and it's
you'll go in the Hall of Fame of our guests.
Yeah, but my holidays they were just pretty chill. Just given the pandemic and everything, usually a much bigger deal. Right. Both of my parents have big families, so usually see a lot of relatives, but not this year. But it's just nice to, I don't know, be at home, have a little bit of a break from things.
No, definitely. It's nice to be, not too much going on sometimes, because like around this time, even when it gets cold, it was not as cold, but you kind of want to stay inside more and more. It's not as like, I ought to go anywhere. So yeah, it's definitely true in that regards. But yeah, let's get into our conversation here. It's a lot going on as far as with Spider-Man coming out. It finally reached, I think it reached like over $1 billion in the box offices. It's obviously the first pandemic movie to really, have those big numbers. I think up till now, I think we've seen most movies get to like maybe a couple 100 million. I think like Shang-Chi had gone to like 200 million, maybe a little bit more. I can't remember. It didn't really do as well as you normally would see an MCU movie do, just because obviously people were worried about going to the theater. But for this, everyone just crashed into the wind and decided to go. And I know we all have thoughts, but actually, I'll let you go first. Obviously, let us know what you thought about the movie, your likes and dislikes, and then obviously, you also have. We're also going to give our Easter egg, so I'll let you give those as well. The things that you saw that kind of stuck out. So why don't you go ahead?
Yeah. So obviously, No Way Home was such an anticipated film. And there was just so many like rumors and just musings happening for so long. And I think that definitely rose the expectations for this, especially having to wait so long just to see like a poster or a trailer. And so it was going to be really easy to disappoint people, I think, just because there had been so much to expect, and so much that had been rumors. But I think that they did a really good job of accommodating those expectations and doing it in a good way. I know one of the things I've seen, like heard a lot in regards to the movie is like fan service. But I think it was done well, and it didn't feel like it was like overly cringy or forced, which I think is something that could be easily done when you're trying to meet specific needs that, fans are asking for. So those are just my general thoughts on it.
Yeah, that's I agree with you in that regards. I know there were some. I think you had some couple of like tidbits that you wanted to point out too. We'll let you go ahead and do that as well. So the first one was, I think, the Rogers musical.
Yes. I think that was like the opening like scene where people had already had just found out that Spider-Man's Peter Parker because of Mysterio's reveal. And he's with like MJ, and he ends up having to kind of like rescue her from this like mob of like angry people
Right.
who are like curious about who she is and what her like relationship to Peter is. And just while he was like swinging, you know, like through the city, it was really, at least for me, especially being someone who loves Marvel and musicals, it was really a nice thing to see the Rogers the Musical billboard and kind of give some perspective as to where and when the show is taking place in regards to the overall timeline. So it kind of lines up a little bit with Hawkeye, just knowing that. And I just think it was nice too because Marvel hasn't really gotten a chance to do things like that to connect their their um, their titles in such a way because they haven't really been able to delve into anything besides movies, Marvel Studios, until
Mm-hmm.
now. So now we have the TV shows and the movies, and we can kind of get some context as to how they line up with each other and where they go in regards to one another. But another thing I did want to mention that I really enjoyed was the scene at Ned's Lola's house where he's with um, MJ. And
Right.
I know for a lot of people, that's a favorite scene just because of the Peter Parker reveals. But
Got it.
like, and obviously that was really fun for me to see too. But like, I'm Filipino,
Yeah.
um, so the same heritage as Ned's character and Jacob Batalon, who portrays Ned. Um, and so seeing his Lola, which is his grandmother, and hearing her speak Tagalog, which is one of the languages in the Philippines, was just really satisfying and rewarding for a Marvel fan, especially a Filipino Marvel fan. And it was kind of awkward, but also fun to be one of the few people while I was watching it to understand what was going on before Ned ever translated anything.
Right.
Um, so it was just when I got to see it, it was actually kind of a small theater. And it wasn't full, surprisingly, but I guess other people were going at different times because I know it was really difficult to still get tickets at my theater. But it was just me and my sister who pretty much understood what was going on before translations, and we're not even fluent. But it was just nice to see because, you know, a lot of times minorities don't get those moments in big things, especially Marvel. Anything as big as Marvel.
No, definitely. I feel the same way. I get times when there's a movie randomly that'll have like Hindi or Gujarati, which are like languages I understand, and I'll be like, "Oh, I know what that guy's saying," and I'll like translate it to like my friends that like just and they'll like laugh because it's something funny sometimes. But yeah, it's definitely fun, like really cool when you can make a connection, like your personal connection to a movie like that. Um, and I think that like obviously a lot more, and we're seeing that a lot more happen now. So that's definitely fun.
And I really
Um,
liked the just to interject the in that scene, having Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man go across the ceiling to go get spider webs out of the corner was pretty fun.
right.
Mm-hmm.
That was the whole thing. Like his like Ned's grandma was like really funny. Like this the whole like she was like, and I like that they didn't do subtitles, like because I don't think
Mm-hmm.
necessarily like not that it was not important what she was saying, but it was fun because like with her and Ned's interaction, I thought that's what made the scene better too. Like
Mm-hmm.
like we don't necessarily need to see like what she's necessarily saying verbatim, but we
Mm-hmm.
got the gist of what was going on because the way she was acting to things that were happening. So you kind of put two and two together that she's kind of upset that these guys have appeared out of nowhere and are
Right.
shooting webs and stuff in her kitchen. So yeah. But yeah, so yeah, let's move on. And the next one, I think you wanted to mention in the mural that you had noticed something.
Yeah. So when Peter goes back to school, um, and now everyone knows who he is, and so now everyone at Midtown's like, oh, Spider-Man goes to this school. And then when Peter first gets in there, he's greeted by like some of the staff and faculty. And like the background of the shot with Peter, there's like a mural on like the wall at Midtown, and I think this was also in Homecoming, but I don't remember seeing it then or pointing it out then. But when I watched No Way Home, I remember just like looking, and I'm pretty there's like an inclusion of Howard Stark in the mural, which I think is a fun little Easter egg. And something that you could like easily miss just because it's like a mural, and there's like a bunch of other people obviously included too. But
yeah, like Einstein, I think was in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. I don't know. I was just saying. Yeah, I think there was like people in like history, so like Einstein was there. And I think Hank Pym was included too.
Yeah, I think I read that as well, but I think I was stuck on the fact that I was like, is that Howard? Especially knowing that in the MCU they've had 2 different actors for Howard. But then it was also kind of covered, so I was like, is that Howard or not? And I was like, am I seeing things or am I right? But I guess I was right because I saw other people say it too eventually. So
no, definitely. And then the last one you had something connecting like from the first movie. You wanted to mention as well.
Oh yeah. So it was in Homecoming, where there's that part where Peter he skips school to go, be Spider-Man and be a superhero, trying to prove that he can do more than just be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. And he was it like a boat, the ship or whatever? I can't remember. Now I'm drawing a blank, but when he's trying to like web that back together after it was split apart, and then Tony comes in his Iron Man suit, and Peter thinks it's just the suit that's empty and not actually Tony in it. But then he gets in trouble for skipping school and lying, and then Tony takes the suit, and then but one of the things is that because Tony wants to take back this suit from Peter doesn't have anything to wear. And so he like gets him just like these cheap tourist clothes that you'll like find everywhere in Manhattan. So he has the I survived my trip to NYC shirt. And it's like huge on him in Homecoming, but I think it was like in one of the opening moments of the movie when they're kind of dealing with like the aftermath of the Spider-Man's Peter Parker reveal, where Peter's just randomly wearing that shirt in his and Aunt May's apartment. And you see that it's that same shirt, but now he's grown into it, which kind of like is nice to see how much time has gone by. And to see that he's actually grown up, but then still kind of give a little bit of a nod to that first MCU Spider-Man film.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. Like they either he's just like taller or also like gotten stronger too, so probably is filled in the shirt from that. It's I like those little connections, like when they bring things back. It's like, yeah, I remember that from the original movie, but yeah, it's definitely fun. But I'll go ahead and give my thoughts on the movie. So overall I really enjoyed it. Like I was super hyped like for the movie to come out. I've been hyped for like a year, I feel like, because I was so excited to see this movie, and I was kind of also getting nervous. Like, man, I really hope they don't screw it up somehow, because obviously it's hard to do a trilogy. Anytime you do a trilogy, it's tough. It's to make. Obviously, the first 2 movies were done well. I mean, obviously there's criticisms involved in every movie, but for the most part, Homecoming and Far From Home, well regarded for the most part. So having finished this off, and especially with so much hype involved, and you're bringing so many different characters into it, obviously it's easier when you're not necessarily introducing a lot of new characters, because the characters that were supposedly going to be in the movie, everyone already knew who they were, like the actors and from previous movies. But still, it's just a lot of moving parts, so you get nervous, like, okay, I hope they don't, kind of rush it or they don't, pace the story properly. But I thought they did. I thought they did pretty well with that. I thought they did a really good job of connecting, you know, the villains, connecting Peter Parker, the storyline, the aftermath of uh, Far From Home, making that connection. Obviously, um, one thing I'll say that I'm concerned with for the end of the movie. I don't know if I was concerned. I'm very intrigued and curious to see how they'll go forward with it because we are going to give away. Obviously, we've been giving away spoilers.
Oops.
we got to mention that. But I mean, if you haven't seen the movie yet, I don't know what the hell you're doing. Listen to us.
You clicked on this link, so you knew we were talking about Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the end when Aunt May they're really bold. I thought it was a bold decision for them to kill Aunt May. It was very bold, and not to say I disliked them doing it. In all iterations of Spider-Man, while he's alone as Spider-Man, Peter Parker always has somebody in his life. Like he has Aunt May, or eventually Gwen Stacy, or even Harry Osborn for a little bit, or Mary Jane. Eventually, they obviously get married. He's never like alone. Peter Parker is never alone on his own. Just nobody knows who he is or whatever. So that's intriguing to me, and like that's when in the past in the comics and stuff like that, when he's really alone, he kind of becomes bitter. So I'm intrigued at how they'll handle that, and as they go and forward to part 4, and we'll talk about part 4 later in the show. But that's, I guess, honestly, like I said, not maybe a concern isn't right, but I'm intrigued because I get that they needed to do with great powers comes great responsibilities, and they need to have Peter Parker learn that lesson. There needs to be consequences. Spider-Man, there's always consequences to whatever he does. Like, for every win Spider-Man has, Peter Parker usually takes 2 losses. Like every comic book, it's like that. Like, yeah, he beats the bad guy, but in the end, something like he lost something while he did the right thing. That's what Spider-Man's always been about. So I do like that they introduced that element, because that's what element I think was missing in the first 2 movies, and the criticism for that criticism was just for the first 2 movies, that Peter Parker / Spider-Man didn't really face the consequences that he normally does, or the things that he normally does. So those are my thoughts in that regards to the movie. So like I said, I really loved the movie. I thought how the pace and everything, the acting, Willem Dafoe, oh my God, he was just marvelous. Like, that's incredible. Like, I think like it's settled that I don't think they can have another Green Goblin, because people will just not. I don't know if people will like it as much, because he's just so great at it. If there's a Green Goblin, it has to be him again somehow, because he's just so elite at it, and at least so soon. I mean, if in Spider-Man 4, I don't know if people will like it as much if there's a Green Goblin in there, because he's just so great at the acting. Like, you hear stories about how Zendaya was saying, like, how he was scaring people on the set. Like, he'd be so nice and pleasant off camera, and then switch into his role as Green Goblin and just be like so menacing. Like, they would freak out a little bit, because he was so like great at his job. So yeah, I mean, all that was great. Obviously, and like I said, just that little part that was for me concerning. But we'll move on into my little Easter eggs here. I always like to point out one thing when we talk about these shows is, obviously MCU does overall MCU does their own things. They have their own storylines, but sometimes they do take bits from the comic book. And this is very loosely they took like the storyline. There's a storyline called One More Day. It's a comic book they had. Although you can throw on that picture really quick of the comic book. But yeah, so that's in there. like I said, very loosely, One More Day, as far as uh, they had in that comic book, obviously he goes to Doctor Strange to try to make Doctor Strange forget who Peter Parker is, because that this is post Civil War when he does that reveal in the comics that he's Spider-Man, or Peter Parker is Spider-Man.
I think you meant to
Um,
say it for Mephisto. He went to Mephisto.
no, no,
You
no.
said
So
that.
in the comics he goes to Doctor Strange originally,
Okay.
but
Well, yeah, I don't.
But Doctor Strange then says, yeah, he can't do anything. Like he tells him no. From then, Mephisto
Okay.
approaches him. Like originally, Spider-Man Peter Parker doesn't know that he's talking to Mephisto after he leaves like the Centaurum.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so there's another little Easter egg in regards to Mephisto. I thought it was there's a devil in disguise, like when Peter's walking into the high school with Ned and MJ. I thought Devil in Disguise, that's a little nod to the comic as well, because it says, like I said, like with Mephisto being involved in the comic, I think they tried to add that in there as well. And then the other one, when he's in the movie, when he's in the Centaurum and he's talking to Doctor Strange, and Doctor Strange is doing that spell. Um, Similar storyline again when he asks Doctor Strange to make everyone but MJ forget, because in the comic that's what he does, and it's a kind of like a little, throwback to the comic, a nod to the comic, I should say, uh, as far as what they were kind of making that connection. The next one I thought was cool was when he is on the bridge and Doctor Octopus is appearing. Um, Not that one, although the one, yeah, that's correct. So you see the suit there, the way that it's similar to in Spider-Man 3 with Tobey Maguire. Later, eventually, the tie gets cut off too. This the same way that you see Tobey's tie getting cut off. I thought that was a nice little nod to Spider-Man 3 and obviously the previous movies. And then the next one again, it's kind of turned into a meme with Norman Osborn when they are in the dungeon and Norman says, I'm something of a scientist myself. That's a throwback to the first Spider-Man movie when he mentions that, so that's turned into kind of a funny meme people use over the years. But it was kind of funny moment. Like he like almost comically says that, I'm something of a scientist myself in the dungeon. It's just a kind of nod to that. And then finally, my last Easter egg that I wanted to mention, or little thing that I saw in the end when the multiverse begins to crack. I couldn't find the exact pictures, but I saw the movie twice. The
I've
first
been
one
meaning to ask you how many times have you seen it?
yeah, I went twice. I definitely wanted to go again because I wanted to make sure if I missed anything, I wanted to pay extra attention, especially in the end when that multiverse was cracking. And finally in the end, I noticed, because originally I only noticed one character, but then when I went back the second time, I noticed a couple of more, and in that I noticed originally I had noticed Rhino when it was cracking, like a silhouette of Rhino. And then this time when I went back the second time to watch it, I also noticed the Scorpion and I noticed Craven the Hunter. I don't know if they'll bring those characters in Spider-Man 4, but I thought that was kind of cool. That they
Apparently,
kind of
Black Cat is also in there too, which I didn't. Honestly, I only saw it once, and I was not able to decipher anything. But I've heard reports online that Black Cat was also in that in
okay,
there too.
yeah. So it's interesting. Like I'm hoping like they bring some of these into the MCU, because I know they're doing weird things with that Sony verse and Sony Spider Verse and the MCU, and I don't know. Carl and I have a lot of opinions on those. It's kind of confusing the way they're setting up, but yeah. So that I thought that was neat. Like I like seeing that. I'm hoping, like I said, I hope like Kraven the Hunter would be pretty cool if somehow they brought him in. I like because Kraven the Hunter is probably one of Spider-Man's like toughest villains that he faces in the comics. So yeah, it would be pretty cool to see him involved. But yeah, that's my stuff that, like I said, the things I like, things I was concerned about with the Aunt May part and little Easter eggs. So Carl, I'll let you take off. I know you had I'll let you go now because I know you had a lot of stuff, a lot of thoughts that you wanted to get off, and a couple of things that you wanted to point out too, as far as a couple of Easter eggs or things that you had noted.
Yeah, so it's kind of I have basically it's a pro con list. Things that I like, things that I don't like. But overall, I'll just talk about the movie first. Of course, I thought it was very good. I thought it was I think it's definitely the best MCU movie of the year, but I still like WandaVision more than this as far as MCU content from 2021. But overall, still a really good movie. Definitely the best of the three Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, and definitely better than all of the Andrew Garfield movies. It's just whether or not I think it's better than Spider-Man 2. And I'm still kind of, because I don't like to make decisions like that right away, typically. So I'll sit on that for like a year before I make a decision on that. And I did Spider-Man 2 with Tobey.
One? Okay,
yeah.
Okay.
Because I totally watched Spider-Man 1, 2, and 3 and Homecoming before watching No Way Home, just as a warmer. I didn't have time to do Far From Home, but and I don't own the Andrew Garfield movies because they're not great, but but I remember enough from them, so generally if I don't like it, I'm not going to buy it. So anyway, I thought it was a great movie. It's really fun. It has tons of Easter eggs, as we've been pointing out. Really good acting from Tom. William Dafoe was fantastic, and especially me getting to watch or watching Spider-Man 1 and seeing Norman Osborn and Green Goblin in that movie, and then seeing him in No Way Home. It's just like, he was such an underappreciated acting performance in the first Spider-Man movie, and now we're getting more of it. Like, I absolutely love the fight with him and Peter in Happy's apartment, and they're just crashing through the floors, and Peter just punching him, and he's just like, like all of that. I was like, yes, that is a crazy person. I love this, and just all of the content with Norman was 10 out of 10. Like, I absolutely loved it. And decent character development, a lot of fun things, but I don't want to get into too much specifics until we get into my list. But I think first off, we can talk about one thing that I liked about the movie, and that is Charlie Cox, Daredevil, is back and he's in the MCU officially. This is his first MCU appearance, and although it was a little, I mean, I guess like it was an Easter egg for him catching that whatever was a brick that went through the window. I thought that probably shouldn't have done that, but still, it was still fun to see that, because it just kind of tips like, oh, there's something strange with him. At the end of the day, I don't think anyone's going to remember that anyway, because no one remembers who Peter Parker is, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, it was still like, he's here. And with Kingpin and the Hawkeye series showing up there, and just more promises to come, I'm pretty hyped. Because I
did a fist pump in the theater when Charlie Cox was like, yes,
yes, right.
I love Daredevil, and I love that. I've said before that Netflix Daredevil series is my favorite show. Like, I love that show so much.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to
go ahead.
Say something real quick. I was curious. What was the reaction like for when you all saw the movie and Charlie Cox's Matt Murdock came onto the screen? Because I feel like in my screening, it wasn't as much of a thrilling like cameo as it was for like other people. Like there were some cheers and whatnot, like for me, especially. Like I feel like I was disappointed that there weren't more people like excited as excited as I was. I was like, what? Why aren't we cheering more?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think the exact same thing happened because, like, when Andrew Garfield was revealed, I'm like, this is like literally the worst kept secret in Hollywood that Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire are in this movie. So when they came, people were audibly yelling and screaming, all of that. But Charlie Cox was like a rumor. We didn't know for sure if he was going to be in it. Or if he could show up somewhere else. So when he came, I was super pumped, but like like you said, like in your theater, I don't think anyone really, it didn't really register with anyone.
So the first time I went, people were excited. Like people like, I think people not as excited when Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire came, but there were some people that like gasped or like I was in a larger theater. I was in a like. Not an IMAX, but one of my local theater has like a multiplex, if you will, and they have like a huge theater that fits like 500 people. So it might be a little smaller than an IMAX, but it's not like the huge like an IMAX. But there was a lot of people in there, so definitely there was a lot more emotion and cheering involved, and reactions in general throughout the movie when different things were happening that. People were getting emotional about various parts of the movie. So there was a little gasp. Excuse me, I apologize. Got a little cough. But yeah, there was a little reaction, but not as much when Tobey and Andrew appeared. And I think me too. I was just kind of zoned in on Charlie Cox being there. So I was also really super excited. So maybe I didn't notice as much either. Mm-hmm. But I was like, yes, finally, he's back. So I was just excited about that as well. So maybe I did miss, but I think I'm pretty confident in saying that like Andrew Garfield and Tobey definitely got a bigger ovation than Charlie Cox. And maybe a lot of people haven't watched the Netflix series. Maybe that's why too. Like not as many people.
If you're at home and you haven't watched the Daredevil Netflix show, it's easily the best. I would put even above WandaVision and Falcon and Winter Soldier and Loki and all of this. So I would still say it's absolutely better. It's 3 seasons. It's absolutely better than all of those. And whether or not that continuity matters, if it's canon, it really shouldn't come into play because you'd be missing out on Vincent D'Onofrio's excellent Kingpin character if you just skip it and think, oh, it's not canon, so I'm not going to watch it. No, absolutely watch it. It may be canon. Like there may be parts of it that are canon, parts of it that are not, or they're just going. We don't know yet, but either way, still the best Marvel show that exists at this point. I would say so.
Yeah, I was just curious because of like the reactions that like I experienced like in my screening. I was curious whether it was just because people weren't familiar with Daredevil. And so they didn't know who he was, which I don't think would be a surprise, just given that Spider-Man just generally is really popular. So you'll probably have had a lot of people watching No Way Home who just don't even know that like Daredevil exists or that there are even like Marvel shows on Netflix. So yeah, right. I was just curious as to how that is with this movie in particular.
Yeah, and I don't know how like popular Charlie Cox is either. Like if you. Like, obviously, I know who Charlie Cox is simply because of the Daredevil show, but I don't know what else he's been in. I don't pay attention a lot of, like, I don't pay attention to a lot of things like that. So I don't know, like, how much of, like, a household name he is either, if he is a household name at all. Like, obviously, Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire are bigger names, too, in general. So, and Spider-Man is Spider-Man. So those movies, even if, eventually, fizzled out, their versions of movies fizzled out, they still got a lot of fanfare, so people know who those guys are more so that could have played into it as well, for sure.
All right, so Salim, I'm gonna go through this list and I'm gonna ask you because I got quite a bit here. I could do all the pros first and then cons afterward, or I can go back and forth. I'll give you the choice on that.
Let's do all the let's do back and forth. So we're not
back and forth. All right. So yeah, this is totally worth discussing. Feel free to comment, interject, either one of you at any point, whatever I'm saying here, because I think it's all worth discussing. So my first pro thing that I liked about this movie is that Jamie Foxx is Electro significantly better than he was in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Like, it's night and day how much better he was, because I absolutely hated his character in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. He was just frustratingly bad, and it wasn't because Jamie Foxx isn't a good actor, because he's an award-winning actor. He's done so much in his career. He is a world-class entertainer, but the character that they made him portray was terrible, completely unlikable as Max Dillon. And then, well, maybe if you like some charming with his awkwardness, I don't know, maybe that's, what, to each his own. But once he had his powers, he was just so I guess dark is like, I could say that for both of the Andrew Garfield movies. They're just really dark, and they didn't have the charm that all of the other Spider-Man movies had. So
he was just blue.
Yeah, he was just a blue dude. And then, like, one of the things, like, it really sent me when watching The Amazing Spider-Man 2. I don't know if you remember this scene, but it sticks with me. I don't know why, but there's this part where he's talking to, I guess, Harry. I don't remember who he was talking to, but then he just like goes into the wire or whatever, and he just kind of just like that. It was like so boring. It was so ugly. Him going into like electricity. I'm like, they could have done something cooler. And anyway, he's so much better, and he just got to be himself. He wasn't a weakling. It pretty much was just acting like Jamie Foxx, though, like just like himself. But still, he got a huge upgrade. He got the arc reactor, the new suit. He had motivations. He had desires and all of that. He just felt like a relatively fully fleshed out character. As far as the next thing, I'm going to go with cons now. I actually didn't like some of the dialogue in this movie, especially between all of the different Spider-Mans. In particular, I do like when they were all on the Statue of Liberty and they were talking about the web shooters and all of that stuff and all of that. But some dialogue before that just felt a little too awkward, which is kind of weird for me to say, because I know Peter Parker is an awkward character in general, just like a nerd. So you put three nerds that are the same person next together, they're probably going to be awkward. But I think the dialogue could have been better. Still be awkward, but just a little bit better of an exchange and felt more satisfying. Especially when you have unresolved storylines or just curiosities about what happened with Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, and they paid some of that off with talking about him and MJ actually working things out and getting married. So like that was cool. But we really didn't get anything out of Andrew Garfield, unless you said you've seen it twice. Do you remember them actually saying what happens to Andrew Garfield Spider-Man after he fought Rhino in that little post-credits thing?
Well, so they mentioned like in the lab scene when they're working on the cures for the rest of the villains outside of Dr. Octopus, him and Toby are talking. Andrew and Toby are talking, and obviously Toby mentions he has MJ, and they work things out. And Andrew's like, "How about you?" Like, he's like, there's not much time for Peter Parker. And Toby kind of says, hang in there, things will get better. So maybe that's a hint towards him eventually meeting his MJ, like in his universe. That's a nod towards that. I will get more into that because I think there's something to talk about as far as Spider-Man 3. we'll revisit that conversation because we are going to talk about that later in the episode as well. But I think
Yeah, I
that's
have more
kind
to
of
say on
hinted
that.
towards it. Yeah, so definitely, I think they were hinting towards that for sure.
hmm All right, so back on the positive side, I like that Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man had a redemption moment with saving MJ. That just it meant a lot to his character to be able to redeem himself from not saving Gwen Stacy in Amazing Spider-Man 2. So I just thought that's probably the most significant thing that happened with Andrew's Spider-Man in this whole movie was him being able to save MJ. Um, okay, and the con negative, which you were mentioning earlier, Salim, about Aunt May's death. I didn't like it, but I think for different reasons. Like, and I totally understand why she had to die, because if they're going with the plot of everyone that knows who Peter Parker is or will forget him, so Aunt May can't forget Peter Parker and then just exist. And then he would just be trying to convince her constantly, hey, I am your nephew. I am your nephew. Like, it wouldn't work. That would be really weird. And then she'd probably think he was like stalking her or something like that. So she had to go. And that was like the only real thing holding him back from being able to complete that spell. Because with MJ and Ned, there's friends and stuff, but at least they got another life. They got to go to MIT. They're still friends and all of that, but that wouldn't work with Aunt May. It just isn't. And that's the only family that he has. So she had to die. But I still would have rather it been someone else. Cause like you said, he always has somebody. And if it's not MJ or Gwen or Harry or somebody, at least Aunt May is around. Even she's died many times in the comic books, but obviously she comes back because he needs somebody. I would have rather it had been Happy though that had passed away in that moment, in that scene. Obviously, that would make a lot of things have to move around. But if you kill Happy Hogan instead of Aunt May, it kind of sends Jon Favreau like, thank you, like, you've been here long enough since 2008 with the Iron Man movie. It's time to move on. I highly doubt Gwyneth Paltrow even wants to come back to do any more Pepper Potts stuff, unless she's in the Armor Wars series with Don Cheadle, which we don't know. But like, all of the Iron Man characters are kind of not necessary outside of War Machine at this point. So I would have rather seen Happy go. And it still would have been an emotional thing because they have a bond. It still would have been important. But again, that changes the whole plot of everyone that knows Peter will forget about him. So it would have to have been a different spell or a different result or something like that, which is, writing. But this is how I felt. All right.
I'll just
go ahead.
Really quick. Yeah, I wanted to mention that is also true too, and I wonder, like, that's one thing. Like, I just worry about like how they'll approach that into the next movies, because like I said, I know like him being like my biggest concern, like I said, is him being completely alone, Peter Parker being completely alone, and obviously you also see that little thing where he's gonna go get his GED now. Another thing I wanted to mention that I liked, I really liked that they showed him using his intelligence when he's fighting, like, especially in the scene when they're in the mirror realm. He's like, "Oh, this is just geometry," and he's like, "That's huge." That's Spider-Man. Always, he's not just a guy that uses his brawn to just beat up the bad guy. He's a guy that uses his brain. He's a scientist. He's a scientist first. So he always uses his brain to fight to beat his enemies or whoever he's fighting. And not necessarily say Doctor Strange and that's is an enemy, but in that moment he's trying to win against Doctor Strange. So he uses his intelligence to win. And then obviously him doing like lab work in general throughout the movie, like doing the when he's trying to make the cures. That's Spider-Man too. He always goes to the lab and tries to figure out a cure or a device or whatever have you that he's created that will help him in whatever situation that he's in. That's why I like that. Well, and I forgot what I was gonna. What I was. I always do this. My mind just tracks off. There was a reason I was talking about this. Shoot, I can't remember. Go ahead in your pros and cons.
All right, yeah, we'll go
There's
ahead.
a reason I was gonna say. I was bringing that up. Now I totally forgot.
All right, so another thing that I liked about the movie would be the lizard actually speaking, like having speaking parts. It wasn't much, but I was afraid that in the trailer, because the trailer also with Sandman being restored back to his human fleshy self being cured, the lizard being cured. I thought that was just nice because the trailer almost, if I just look off of that, I would have thought they both stayed in their transformed state. The entire movie stayed as CG assets and never had the opportunity to speak or be human again, just based off of the trailer. So I was just happy to see that he had speaking lines, again, very small, basically saying, "Hey, do you want to be a lizard too?" But not much after that. And then just seeing Sandman actually being restored because he's not all that bad of a guy. However, going into my cons is still talking about them, is that they were completely underdeveloped. Like this was a Doc Ock slash Green Goblin focus as far as the villains, with a little bit of love thrown towards Electro, but Lizard basically spent most of the time in a jail or in a van. So he didn't really do much. And we did see him transform back to human at the end, but even then it was like, it's kind of a waste bringing that actor out there for the 5 seconds that he was actually on screen for as himself. In Sandman, I was again pleased to see him back restored, but his motivations were a little weird. I just felt like we could have done more with them, and even had, which I kind of will come back to this later, but it would have been nice to see some post-credits scenes, like a prologue of all of these characters going back. But again, I'll get back into that in momentarily, because that's kind of a different discussion. All right, we talked about Norman being awesome, so we'll move on to something I mentioned with you, Salim, before, and they did it, is that he's back to basics. So he's back to a cloth costume that he sewed himself. There's no Stark tech. There's no AI. There maybe he has his web shooters and some spider tracers and maybe some small time stuff that he has to make on his own. But for the most part, Tony Stark era is over with, and I think that's a good thing, because this MCU Spider-Man, for me, although good, still didn't feel quite like Spider-Man because of his over reliance on all of the Tony Stark stuff. Cool costumes, really interesting things being done, some Easter eggs like with the Iron Spider costume and stuff. But at the end of the day, Spider-Man is just a dude in the costumes, web shooters, and his intelligence, and I really want that Spider-Man to show up. So I'm actually more excited for the future of Spider-Man movies with Tom Holland than I am with this movie. Whether or not they do more crossovers and stuff, it really doesn't matter. I just want to see what MCU's take on a classic young adult Spider-Man too, because that's the thing, like I said before, that my favorite Spider-Man is the era of him being in college, young adult sort of stuff, not high school and not too old, but just trying to figure things out with his life, and he'll have that opportunity now.
And I just remember when, before I went into my little rant about the science of reason I was going into that, they show him, he's going to take his GED, to get his GED. I'm hoping that they have him in college, at least for a movie. And they show him trying to get, his science degree, in whatever, like, he's going to be majoring in. But I hope that somehow, like, he ends up going, like, ESU or something like that, because obviously in the comics, he goes to Empire State University.
Yeah, he ain't getting into MIT.
Well, yeah, obviously because no one knows who Peter Parker is anymore, so those results are out the door, unless he has a Matt Damon like Good Will Hunting thing where he just works at MIT and then gets in because he's like super smart. He shows like he's super smart. Anyways, yeah. So Ashley, did you have any thoughts on that as well? Like the angle of them showing him being, as far as getting like his GD and then obviously showing his like intelligence and things like that.
Yeah, you mentioned before that the geometry tidbit. I thought that was really fun and nerdy in a very appropriate way that you'd expect out of him. And I did like that quick shot where they, give that glimpse of the GED like study book or whatever when he's moving into that new apartment and on his own completely.
Right. Yeah, it'll be interesting. Like I said, I hope that in the next movie he's in college and he's like, I don't know how that'll work out, but yeah, hopefully he's like seen as acknowledged as being this really intelligent, person. Because in the comics, obviously he's not like Reed Richards or anything like that, but he is like maybe like one of the top 30 smartest people in the Marvel universe. He's not, he's a really bright person. So that's an important part of who Spider-Man Peter Parker is. So that's definitely going to be something we'd like to see.
Yeah, just one more thing on the GED bit. I think it was important to it's like such a small moment, but it helps provide so much context as to what exactly the state of the world is for him and everyone else in relation to him. Because no one knows Peter Parker, but that doesn't exactly mean he couldn't try to go back to not necessarily Midtown, but at least just any other high school and try to somehow enroll there and get his degree or his diploma, and then try to go to college after that. But now we know he's kind of just giving up on that and just going straight to the GED and figuring out where he can go from there.
Right.
Yeah, and everything isn't, which is really important to Spider-Man's character, that everything isn't glitz and glamour and money fixes everything for him. He has to literally start his life all over. He has no family. He's going back to school to get his GED. He has to get a regular job. He sewed his costume himself. He didn't have it handed to him. This is showing you the struggles of Peter Parker. Spider-Man gets all of the fame and recognition and some of the infamy as well if it's J. Jonah Jameson, but for the most part, he does all this stuff for free. He doesn't get paid for it, and he's not living this life at the Avengers Tower or the mansion or getting chauffeured here and there or going on jet planes and stuff. All this stuff's done and over with, and he is back to living an everyday struggle, which is the biggest thing about Spider-Man is that he's super relatable to almost any regular person there is.
He's back to being the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
Right.
That's what he is. You see him swinging through a neighborhood in the end. I forgot to send pictures to Aldo, but I had taken the snapshots. I had found the images of his costume, and it's right from the comics.
Right.
His costume is exactly the way it is in the comics. The red and the blue, the way it's sewed, the spider in the front, and then the spider in the back. That's from the comics. I know some people were saying it's a nod to Andrew Garfield's costume and Tobey Maguire's, but I don't think so. It's from the comics.
No, I would say before this costume, the Andrew Garfield from Amazing Spider-Man 2 was the most comic accurate one.
Yeah.
And my favorite one by far. But this one is the way the blue looks on that costume is just it's just so beautiful to me. And that it is everything, every detail, they nailed it, and they didn't try to sit there and let's put our own spin on it, or let's try to they just he's been wearing this since 19 whatever or 63
60s.
More or less Sure, he had the black costume and some other color changes, but for what it's worth, the costume has not changed very much over the years, and every movie has done something in their own unique way. But this one is like, no, that's spot on.
Right.
All right. Lastly, before we move on, which is kind of getting into what we want to talk about at the end anyway, is everyone got cured. Green Goblin, Doc Ock, Sandman, Electro, and the Lizard, which, by the way, that's only 5. That is not 6. As far as Sinister Six, Venom's in there, but that's not, he wasn't really there. So I won't call this the Sinister Six, but everyone got cured. And my curiosity is that, okay, it's kind of an open thread, because when they came, what they said when they came is they came right before they died. So Doc Ock, with the sun falling down on him and he's going into the river right before that death, he gets transported out of there, and he's in this movie before. I mean, I'm trying to make sense of it, because it means also, like, Norman, he gets impaled by the Goblin Glider. So they're saying before that happens, he gets pulled out and comes to No Way Home. He gets cured. He goes back. When does he go back? Does he die when he goes back? Does he not die when he goes back? Does he not get impaled? Because that completely changed. Does he go back to the same time point that he left? Because that completely changes the timeline if he does. And I feel like we needed some sort of prologue or something to as a resolution, because if he goes back and he at the same time he left, he's still alive. That means Harry doesn't hate Peter Parker for killing his dad because he didn't die. That means he never became Green Goblin, and he never died fighting Venom. Like, that's like completely changing that storyline. And if he doesn't, and maybe he goes back at the current timeline, like current time as Toby is old Peter Parker, that means he would have been dead for however long, and then now he's back, and they have to explain why he's alive again. So there's just kind of stuff like that. Also with Vulture and or not Vulture, excuse me, that's a whole nother thing with the Lizard and Electro and stuff. They had the same deal. They died fighting Spider-Man, and they go back. So how does that affect those universes and those characters? And I feel like leaving that open-ended was a negative to me.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Kind of confusing, and because it changes a lot, because he obviously talks about how Harry Osborn died, and that Harry Osborn is an interesting character I want to get into later, because they don't mention either Harry Osborn in this movie. Like, they mention his name. They mention his name, but they don't. It's interesting that if everyone that knows Peter Parker is supposed to come to this universe, but Harry Osborn didn't come.
Exactly.
So,
I mean, James Franco being the issue, probably, but
I mean, they could have had DeHaven, Dane DeHaven somehow up here, but he didn't. So I want to get into that later.
And we'll go ahead and start that
theory as well. But yeah, we'll move on. Like, so we'll talk about the post-credit scene. Obviously, they show Tom Hardy sitting at a bar. That was weird to me a little bit, because they're searching for these, images or glimpses or whatever that on their radar that from another universe, but they didn't sense Tom Hardy for some reason. I didn't get that. That was kind of confusing, but it's kind of funny. His bar scene, he's kind of just like his normal, like, weird self. He's like trying to get notes on this universe that he's in. And then obviously after everyone is sent back home, so he gets sent back to his world or universe as well, and we see a small little symbiote that gets left behind, because he's about to, like, Venom is about to say, okay, let's go to New York and go confront this Spider-Man guy, and then all of a sudden he gets up and he vanishes, but the little symbiote stays behind. So I'm guessing that little symbiote is gonna crawl from, I don't know where they're, to Caribbeans,
Mexico,
or Mexico, all the way to New York eventually to see Spider-Man. I'm guessing that's what that means. What were your guys' thoughts? I'll start with Ashley on that scene.
Yeah, it was weird to just see that, and it kind of left me confused because I was curious how all this magic and these spells worked then, because yeah, even if it wasn't, that little piece wasn't with, Eddie Brock or whatever, it's like, why does the spell still not cater to that little symbiote if it's not from there?
Right.
Like, why is it that it was able to still somehow stay out of its actual time?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's confusing too. Yeah, like the whole thing, like that's like I thought the scene was funny, and I mean, I guess like that's that's the continuity error, right? In a sense, because you're like, okay, why didn't they detect Tom Hardy, or not Tom Hardy, but Eddie Brock and Venom when they detected everyone else, and why did that symbiote was able to stay? That little sliver of symbiote was able to stay. That's interesting. Yeah, definitely. Carl, how about you? What are your thoughts in general about that
Yeah,
scene?
I'm with you guys on that. I mean, at the end of the day, they got to make this stuff work. Like,
Yeah,
they want people want um, Spider-Man and Venom to fight at some point, which raises bigger questions. If he's not staying in the MCU, he's just there for a blip and went back. That means at some point, because we know they're going to do Spider-Man versus Venom somewhere. Whether or not, I mean, I would assume they would do Tom Hardy versus Tom Holland and not do an MCU version of Venom, and not, I mean, who knows? Maybe we do get Tom Hardy in the MCU as Venom as a separate one from the Venom verse. Maybe that can happen.
right.
Because we don't know, like everyone, just in general with Loki, there are variants, and there could be a variant of, or the Sacred Timeline version of Eddie Brock. There could be, which gets into Harry and stuff. There could be still a Harry Osborn and a Norman Osborn in the MCU that are not played by William Dafoe, and they could still exist. Oscorp doesn't exist at this point, but they could still exist as people, and maybe that even just get some fires going in that regard. But yeah, they have to explain some of this, and they have to make it happen some kind of way. Which I give you credit, Salim, because you did point this out. I didn't know, and that at the Venom post-credit scene that he actually said we have knowledge from the multiverse. I thought he said universe, and that's why I didn't believe you. But since he has knowledge from the multiverse, yes, it makes sense that he was even there to begin with, because he knows from the what's his name, Topher Grace version of Venom,
Right.
who Peter Parker is. So it makes sense that he would be there.
I was right. See, how dare
You
you
were right.
question me?
I misheard. I only listened to so much. These old ears. But yeah, but that theory is not just checks out, but it is valid. That is why he was there. But it still raises a question, as you just said, why wasn't Harry Osborn in any version of Harry Osborn there? And I'm pretty sure there's other characters that know who Peter Parker, that was Spider-Man. If we go look at the tapes, why they weren't there. Even Gwen could have been there, right?
Right,
So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But,
and this would kind of move into the Spider-Man for what we want to see and stuff, and that's my theory and why they didn't introduce Harry Osborn, because I do think that they're going to bring in a Harry Osborn. I don't know how much they'll bring in a Norman Osborn. I mean, like I said, MCU does their own thing, so they don't necessarily need to do like an Oscorp and whatnot. Because I found it interesting, like I said, that neither Harry Osborns were brought into this movie, and I think that's telling. And for the fourth movie, like I do eventually want to see the black costume and him fighting a Venom. But I would hope the fourth movie they just let him be the regular
yeah.
Spider-Man for the
Mhm.
entirety of the movie, and maybe in the end of the movie, like in a post-credit scene or at the last scene, he can become like the black suit that kind of helps him defeat his main villain or whatever. and then going into like the second, like so supposedly they're going to do another trilogy. So then Spider-Man 5 can be when he has the black costume more so, and so forth. But yeah, I find that interesting, and I do think Harry Osborn is going to be introduced. This universe is your Harry Osborn is going to be introduced, and I think they had rumor like, I mean, I don't know if that's an actual rumor, but I think like passingly, Tom Holland mentioned like Timothy Chalamet playing Harry Osborn, which I think would be a solid choice. I think, in my opinion. But they said they could potentially bring him in. He doesn't have to be, like I said, he doesn't have to become the Green Goblin in this MCU. He could eventually become Venom in this universe. Because they could become best friends still, and eventually Spider-Man will have a best friend that he battles. And I know a lot of people are mentioning Ned becoming the Hobgoblin, but I feel like that's too easy. Like, especially when they talk about in this movie that I don't want to be you'll never. I promise you, I'll not become a villain to you, or I won't try to hurt you. So I think they kind of squashed that he's not going to be the.
He doesn't remember that. He doesn't remember saying that now. So.
I don't know. I just think I don't know. I don't see it. I don't know.
They're not friends.
Yeah, well, they aren't friends, but I think they'll become friends again. I mean, I think they'll be at some point, and I don't think they're writing those characters off. So
that's my question though. Like, I just want more Zendaya. That's all. I mean, like, respect to like Ned and everything, but I want more MJ. However, I can totally see them going in another direction with the supporting cast, like you said, bringing in Harry. Because Harry is his best friend. Like, despite all the comic book history, Harry is his best friend. And right. Ned Leeds was not really that in the comic books. They kind of made him. The Ned Leeds in the MCU is a combination of multiple characters from the comic books. But his best friend is Harry Osborn. And right. Personally, I would love to see they actually go in another direction with the Osborns. With one thing that we've never seen is like comic accurate looks for their hairstyles between maybe kind of Sandman, but I've seen so much fan art over the past couple of years of a black version of Norman and Harry where they have like waves, like, black people have like waves and stuff, and they would it just has that, and but he's actually a Green Goblin. So I would love to see a black Norman and Harry with the waves, and then and then I guess like the mask is just a wave cap, but right. But that was still, it would be really cool for a big change, and it would be a great opportunity to make something different and diverse, as well as giving him a look that is kind of hard for like somebody like William Dafoe to pull off. He'd have to cut his hair off or figure out something, but William Dafoe is amazing, but I think we've already, other than J. Jonah Jameson, we've established that you can have the same character in different universes and they look different. So I think it's other than Jameson, we can totally do that. And then we can also. Oh, I'm terrible with that. I cannot cast anything. No,
doesn't mind to play them. No, okay.
I watch animated things, so I don't know people's faces. But yeah, in bringing in like Gwen Stacy as well, and another opportunity to move away from MJ, which again I want Zendaya back, but bringing in Gwen Stacy and even Captain Stacy and some other supporting characters, even going some more of the modern characters. Would be a nice way to segue the Spider-Man.
Yeah, 100%. That would be, it'll be interesting. Like as far as the characters that do. How about you? Actually, have you thought about what you want to see in Spider-Man 4, as far as characters and what they do with Peter Parker, Spider-Man, and so forth?
Yeah, kind of going off what you both have mentioned in regards to like Harry and Gwen, I can definitely see them being introduced into the MCU with this next film, especially knowing now Peter has just this gigantic void in his life. He has no one, like we've mentioned. and discussed. And I think in the end of No Way Home, you see him kind of struggling to decide whether he really wants MJ and Ned in his life again, or more so whether he wants to be in their lives again and put them through potentially all of this chaos and trauma and whatnot all over again. Just knowing how much danger he had already put them in, you could see like he really wants them to be in his life, but he doesn't know whether it's a good idea. And like you see him like get rid of that like card with like what he wanted to say to like MJ or whatever. And I think introducing Harry and Gwen could be a good way to provide some contrast as to what Peter wants to do moving forward and whether he thinks it's better to move on from his past that no one else has any knowledge of, and whether he wants to just kind of start over completely, and move on to other people while still maybe like giving some regard to the people of his past, because it'd be weird for him to not care about them anymore. But I think it'd be an interesting way to bring in those characters that we haven't been able to see in the MCU yet, from Marvel Studios, like we have in the other Spider-Man films.
Yeah, and I know Carl, you mentioned that they're gonna do a Black Cat movie, but I would be kind of interested
rumors.
to see. I would be kind of interested if they bring Felicia Hardy / Black Cat into the MCU, because when he is alone, when like in the comics, when he doesn't have MJ anymore, and he's alone as Spider-Man, he and Black Cat and Spider-Man kind of have a relationship. So that's something maybe they could tackle as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I now actually would rather have Black Cat than to have Gwen Stacy. That's a character that we have not seen at all in any of these movies. So you're giving, because just like with Homecoming and stuff, like they didn't give us Spider-Man origin because we've had it so many times. We don't want to see the same stuff over and over again. I think this is being the end game for Spider-Man. This is the opportunity to go in a completely new direction and introduce new characters. And Black Cat is a perfect example of a character that is both a anti-hero as well as a love interest for Peter / Spider-Man. That would be a great direction for him to go. It's just whether or not Sony wants to make this a Black Cat movie and keep it in their universe and do their own Black Cat universe stuff, a trilogy, or if they're going to have it be officially an MCU character that they only use with the Spider-Man movies, which would be definitely better.
And like
she's not interesting outside of Peter.
No, exactly. I think she's very she's a big character with Peter Parker or with Spider-Man, not so much Peter Parker, because obviously she doesn't know who Peter Parker is, or she doesn't know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man.
Man, she doesn't care.
Yeah, she doesn't care. They just have that little, because obviously she's introduced as a villain because she's a cat burglar, and they eventually kind of have that situation kind of the same way as the Batman and Catwoman have in a sense, that relationship as just Batman and Catwoman. They have Spider-Man and the Black Cat end up having a relationship. And the villains I was thinking about, I mean, obviously it's super early. Who knows what will happen, especially with Kingpin. Like, I would like to see Kingpin just because I would like to see him fighting characters in the neighborhood, like doing like the fighting like mobsters, because in the early on, that's what he really does. He does mix it up with super villains like the Green Goblin, the Vulture, and all these other villains. But I do like remember when I mentioned the Enforcers? Like, it'd be kind of interesting. Like, Kingpin hires the Enforcers, and then the Scorpion, has the Scorpion made. That could be interesting too, just to kind of mix it in. There's a lot of things, moving parts going on with that, but those are like the villains I'm thinking about as well as for Spider-Man 4, because those are the villains that he hasn't faced, that he does face a lot in the comic books. He hasn't faced the Scorpion. Obviously, the Enforcers have never been mentioned in any of the Marvel movies, or any of the Spider-Man movies. Obviously, there's that, and then obviously Kingpin. Kingpin is an original Spider-Man villain, and then he eventually gets remade into this huge, elusive mobster that never gets arrested, is always able to get away, and becomes a major Daredevil villain. But
which makes it nice that we have that crossover with Daredevil now.
Exactly, and maybe
although he doesn't remember that, but he's still there.
No, exactly, and Daredevil, because Spider-Man and Daredevil, they're kind of in the same area when like the radius of where they cover their a lot of their stuff. So they cross over a lot in the comics too. So I mean, you could maybe have Charlie Cox in the fourth Spider-Man movie as Daredevil.
But while we're talking about villains, I haven't mentioned yet, which we can kind of segue into this a little bit. The Vulture did not show up at all in this movie. They did not mention him whatsoever, and we're about a month away from Morbius coming out, and it's he's in the trailers for Morbius the movie, and they talk to each other, so that means that the Vulture is in the Morbius universe, right? Maybe?
Right.
Possibly, or is Morbius in the MCU? Because how would that work? And also, I literally just thought of this a couple moments ago. He doesn't remember who Peter Parker is now.
Right.
So what is happening in this Morbius movie? Because I am very confused now as to what those two are doing, talking to each other, and how they are in the same universe, and whether or not. Because I also saw maybe a month or two ago, Michael Keaton was on like the Tonight Show or something like that, and he said, before he was talking, I think he was talking to Jimmy Fallon or whatever the show is, but he was saying that he just got done shooting some Vulture stuff. So he just got done shooting some new scenes, like this was like a month ago, which obviously didn't make it into No Way Home. So I don't know if that means it's going to be in Morbius or if they cut it, or like I'm very confused of what's going on with this character.
Right. Another thing I want to note, like something that they never referenced back, and MCU never does anything without reason. Remember in Homecoming, the final like post-credit scene when they're in prison, and Matt Gargan, who eventually becomes the Scorpion in the comics, he goes into talking to Adrian Toomes, and he's like, "Oh, we heard you know who Spider-Man is, and I know a very interested person that would love to know who that is." And obviously, Adrian Toomes plays dumb. He's like, "Listen, if you knew if I know who Spider-Man was, do you think he would be alive still?" Like, he plays it off because obviously he probably wants to take his own revenge on Spider-Man himself. But that's interesting too, because I always wonder, like, all right, could that be the Kingpin? Is that Osborn? Like, where are they going with that? So that will probably be revisited too. Well, like, what are your thoughts on it, Ashley? Because like I said, they never do anything without reason. Like, they don't just have throwaway scenes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely forgot that scene even existed until you just mentioned it now. So it's definitely interesting to think about now, especially given the context of No Way Home and no one knowing who Peter is. And so that having not the same impact. But like you said, Marvel does everything with reason. So it'll be interesting to see if that actually plays out somewhere along the line.
Right.
I think there's a small chance that it won't, but and I only say this because also in Homecoming there is a continuity error at the beginning of the movie where they're talking about Adrian Toomes and his crew getting all the stuff from the Chitauri, from the Battle of New York and everything, and damage control. They have that card that says, like, I think it says 8 years later or something like that. The timing of that continuity is like a well-known error in that movie. Like, it is a publicly acknowledged error that they said the wrong amount of time. Like, it's too much time that went past. So that is something that they can't fix anymore. And they also can't change the fact that they made that post-credit scene, because they probably just thinking now, okay, we're going to go in this direction with Spider-Man. So there's a chance that they may not even flesh that out, is what all I'm trying to say. I don't like that, but I think there's a chance that they just like, okay, well, we just got to move on.
Yeah. I mean, I can't remember which movie it is, but isn't one of the like post or like mid-credit scenes for one of like the MCU movies, it's like Thanos and he's, about to like get the gauntlet, and then we find out later, obviously that doesn't line up anymore because
That's true.
He gets his own later on, and that one was like a fake. So I mean, it's definitely possible, but
yeah, that's true. You never know. It's interesting to think about. But the final thing we'll talk about, obviously after the Spider-Men, if you will, were introduced into No Way Home. A lot of fans started talking about how Andrew Garfield never got his like trilogy and a conclusion to his story, if you will. I mean, technically, you can argue Tobey Maguire potentially didn't get one, but he got a trilogy, and so did Tom Holland. He got at least one trilogy. And eventually he'll probably get another trilogy. But Andrew Garfield, then a lot of fans are like, maybe they should do a trilogy for Andrew Garfield and have closure for him, and maybe eventually actually meet as MJ and have some kind of like final closure. I was thinking about that. I kind of went back and forth on it. I didn't know how much I wanted that to happen, but I was thinking like, if Sony is doing all these characters, like all these, Spider-Man villains that are not part of the MCU, maybe it makes sense to have a third Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield just to have him get closure. I don't know if you guys remember, but there was a rumored one that was supposed to be in production. It was like pre-production. They had a plan, but then it was squashed. There's an image I had sent, although if you want to pop it up really quick. But yeah, that was Spider-Man 3 that was originally planned. So like they had Shailene Woodley as Mary Jane Watson. I mean, Dane DeHaan was supposed to be back as Harry Osborn / Green Goblin. Paul Giamatti was supposed to have a bigger role as the Rhino. You see Felicity Jones was supposed to be in it. I don't think she's pictured in here, but she was supposed to be Black Cat. Felicia Hardy, Black Cat, Emma Watson as Jill Stacy. One interesting thing, not related to necessarily anything, but Jill Stacy in the comics is like, so after in the comics when Gwen Stacy dies, Jill Stacy, they introduce her, that's her cousin, and in the comics, Jill Stacy looks exactly like Gwen Stacy, but they have just different hair color. So I was wondering, like, why didn't they just have Emma Stone back as Jill Stacy? But that's not relevant. But that was just something I thought about. But yeah, they had like these characters that they were supposedly supposed to do, and that movie got squashed. So, like, what are your thoughts? Like, actually, I'll start with you first. Like, what are your thoughts? Do you think they should have a third one for Andrew Garfield just to give him some kind of closure on his storyline?
I'm kind of like torn on the potential for that. Like, I understand very much why people want that third one, especially the fact he never got it. But I'm also just like, I don't want it to happen just for the sake of it being able to happen. Like, it should be done purposefully and not just, like I said, for the sake of having it. And like, I'd want it to be something where it helps move some overall narrative forward, which is what we really see nowadays with these films. So I don't know, I'm very much so back and forth on whether I'd want to see it. I'd probably lean more toward not having it, just because I think No Way Home is supposed to help give us that closure for his character. Obviously, it's not a lot, and there's still a lot that's left to, think about, and a lot you don't know. But I mean, there's a reason he got his redemption moment in No Way Home.
Right. Carl, how about you? Have you thought about that? Do you think that's a good idea? Just dumb idea? You don't want to see it? You want to see it? I don't know.
Absolutely not. No, definitely no. Nothing against Andrew and all of that, but we've already moved on, and I think that it would just make it more confusing for any casuals. Like, sure, the three of us can keep up with what's going on with these characters in these universes and stuff like that, but the fact that we've already rebooted Spider-Man 3 times, and then most casuals will say, if it's live action and it says Marvel on it, does that mean it's in the MCU? Right. And that would just cause so much confusion having another Spider-Man movie, it not be Tom Holland, and then another Tom Holland movie comes out after that. Also, we already have multiple Spider-Mans with the Into the Spider-Verse happening, which is a great place to put Andrew if he wants to voice over a Spider-Man. You can even continue his story in the Into the Spider-Verse and just say his universe continues to happen in Into the Spider-Verse, and then he gets pulled into that movie. Also, with Into the Spider-Verse, we already know that Sony wants to make a live action version of that. So that would be a great place to, like I said, I want a prologue with all of these characters. I don't want a whole movie, but I want to know what happens with these villains and these Spider-Men when they go back to their universe and what that looks like now. Give me 20 seconds of it and I'll be satisfied. And if we can just get like a scene in the live action Into the Spider-Verse where Tobey and Andrew come back and meet up with Tom and then some other versions of Spider-Man, but get those two to have a small little segment in that movie to continue their story just enough to be satisfied, that'd be more than enough for those characters, because they don't need to have a full-fledged movie. We don't need Spider-Man 4 with Tobey and the Vulture, and we don't need The Amazing Spider-Man 3 with Andrew and Black Cat or whatever they had planned. We just need to have one Spider-Verse movie with the Inheritors, presumably, because why else would they get together? And whatever they do with the animated Into the Spider-Verse, but that's it. It's enough to move on. And I think even Andrew Garfield, although he's probably grateful for his role as Spider-Man, I'm also pretty sure he's probably tired of answering so many questions over his career about what about Spider-Man, because he's done so many other things, and he's been on Broadway, he's been in other movies, but he always, just like Tobey Maguire, they only associate Spider-Man with these two actors. So I think being able to step away from that, let this be a good conclusion for them, unless, again, Spider-Verse, that's another thing. But I would be super annoyed if I was Andrew. Tobey has had some time off and away from the spotlight, so I think he's probably cooled down enough. But I would be pissed if I were Andrew and people could never stop talking about Spider-Man and how, you didn't get your third movie. What do you feel about Tom Holland? Or would you like to be a part of the MCU? And all of this stuff. It would just be super annoying. That's a tangent. Sorry.
No, but yeah, that's true. I mean, I did think they gave some closure to, and same with Ashley mentioned, that they did give some closure to Andrew Garfield as far as what will happen with him. I think they hinted towards him potentially meeting his Mary Jane in his universe, because Tobey mentions that give it time. You'll just things will work out. He says that, and he probably will eventually meet his Mary Jane and so forth, and he'll have a happy ending of some sort, if one way or another. But yeah, I think that's pretty much a wrap for today's show. Did you guys have any other final thoughts you wanted to give before we wrap up here? Ashley, if you would like to, plug anything that you've been working on, like writing, articles or anything, or that you want to let our listeners or viewers know about as well?
Nothing in the works at the moment. There's a nice little break from Marvel we're getting right now, which is like a little upsetting, but also kind of nice. So nothing in the works yet, but I'm always happy to, talk Marvel or whatever. If you want to follow me on Twitter, my handle's on the screen, but at Wihango12. If I have anything, I'll post it there. Might do a blog post or something on my personal site about some favorite comics I read this year, but we'll see if I have time for that. But yeah.
That's cool. Excellent. Carl, how about yourself? Any final thoughts?
We didn't get to mention it, but Miles Morales was somewhat referenced by Jamie Foxx's Electro. I hope we get to see a Black Spider-Man one. There's a Black Spider-Man out there somewhere in the multiverse. So cool.
It's funny.
We're gonna see it eventually.
It's too bad this Spider-Man. Originally Peter Parker, you would think he would be black because like the times that are made, and it's tough because like obviously he's like the guy that like Jamie Foxx makes a nice joke about it. Like he lives in Queens and helps out poor people. Mm-hmm. Like you would think, like you would think he's a white guy, but no, it makes a little joke. But yeah, he does reference it. This is the second time Miles Morales has been referenced in the MCU. So I think eventually, I don't know when, but down the line he will. And I hope they do it as a standalone. Like I hope they don't just kind of plug him into a movie with Peter Parker. Like I hope they have
has to be introduced somehow.
I guess, but like I mean, in the Miles Morales is like he's in a different universe. Like his Spider-Man, his Peter Parker dies at the event, and he takes up the role as Spider-Man. And like I think like it's like a Peter B. Parker or something like that. I can't remember.
That's
in the comics. Yeah, but I think in the comics that's how it is too. Like
in the Ultimate comic books. That's where Miles comes from. It's from the Ultimate line.
Right. So that's a different universe than the Amazing Spider-Man. So, it's just interesting to think. But obviously, we'll see what happens with that. But
on that note, real quick, wouldn't it be awesome if they introduced Miles Morales as Spider-Man in the Venom universe?
That's true.
First, like, because calling it like the Ultimate Universe, they can call it whatever they want, but that there's a Spider-Man in that universe and he fights Venom, and it's Miles and not Peter, and then eventually they move Miles over to the MCU.
Yeah, I mean they could do that. I don't know how they would cross over again unless Doctor Strange has a spell again that brings people that know Peter Parker over. I don't know. We'll see.
Well, they've done it.
Yeah, we'll see anyways. We'll see how that works out. But anyway, that's a wrap for today's show. Obviously, please follow us on our personal Twitter accounts at Science Fliction. And Carl, you can follow at Ninja Turtle. If you missed any previous episodes, you can find us under the Barroom Network on YouTube and also on all major and minor podcast platforms. Thank you again to Ashley for joining us. Thank you for everyone for tuning in. As always, for Carl and myself. Till next time.
Peace out.
Hi.